let's get into my July favorites. Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. It is the end of July, which means that I have a month of favorite things to share with you all. I really enjoy these reflections so that I can look back and see what it is that I was really diving into, enjoying, studying, etc. And I hope that these can be helpful for anybody who might be interested in some of these things. It's kind of like mini reviews of decks and books and miscellaneous objects, magical practices, those sorts of things. So without further ado, we'll dive in. I'm going to start with decks as I usually do, so tarot and oracle, then we'll move into books. Finally, we'll end with magical items, magical practices, and miscellaneous things. So that's the order we're going in if you are interested in skipping around. So first we'll start with the tarot decks as I usually do, and we will start with these two. So I'll mention them together. We have the Alchemical Tarot Renewed 5th edition, the quintessential edition by Robert M. Place. And we have the Tarot of the Sevenfold Mystery 2nd edition, also by Robert M. Place. So I acquired both of these. I had the Alchemical Tarot 4th edition, and I just got the 5th edition, along with the Tarot of the Sevenfold Mystery, the 2nd edition, because I was reading the larger book, which I'm going to mention when we get to the books, but these were primary things I was working with this month. I would say this was a big Robert M. Place month and his decks and just diving into them. These two really go together very well. The art is very similar, especially in the minors here. I'll show a few cards. But the artwork is very similar, the subject matter is similar. Of course, the Alchemical Tarot focuses more heavily on alchemy, whereas this deck is a little bit more of that Neoplatonism. It's a little bit more, it's hermetic, it's more about these sorts of belief systems and mythos that are not as directly tied to alchemy. Although alchemy does play a part in this deck as well, it does focus more on philosophy and various things like that. But of course, this can be taken quite alchemically. So we do have those elements at play. I like how there's labeling of certain things within this deck. I'm trying to find good examples of this so that one can reference the various elements. So for example, we have Satan, so we have the idea of reason, of will, of appetite, and those various desires that are part of certain philosophical belief systems or Neoplatonic structurings of belief systems as far as the soul and consciousness, and appetite being that lesser instinct, the one that you are supposed to not succumb to through the power of will, rising above, sorts of things like that. So I found that to all be very interesting in study. And of course, I was reading the book, which illuminates much more on that subject matter, which is really helpful. And so it's been fun to actually get to understand a lot of these symbols. I will say these boxes, while they're nice in theory with this hard box that is, it has that sort of textile fabric on top, the cards don't fit very well, and I'm always scared I'm going to ruin them and trying to push them in because they never go down very easily. So I do get a little bit nervous, but still a nice box, I would say. Very, very high quality. I've enjoyed that deck immensely. And then there's the Alchemical Tarot, of course, which references alchemy a lot more directly. We have the majors, which take you through the I would say alchemy going toward the Philosopher's Stone, all of that, and the minors are all kind of somewhat geared toward alchemy or various processes that can be tied to alchemy. And it was just nice to learn about the various, like, what does this mean in terms of the color green being the unripened, and the red symbolizing more of that Philosopher's Stone, and the ideas of like distillation and fermentation and putrefaction and resurrection, all of that. I've loved to learn all of that history and symbolism. I'm definitely not an expert by any means, but I'm a little bit more knowledgeable now, and who knows, I think I might continue on that path and make it a point to investigate and study more outside of that. So the next tarot deck I have is the Tarot of the Spirit, and this is one that I am going to be investigating in August. I've been using it the past few months, but I'm really going to dig into the reading materials, and it's funny because I had the guidebook already, the extra guidebook, which is a little bit of a larger guidebook to be fair, but I was excited to read this, discovered that there was another book associated with the deck that referenced the Kabbalah, and I thought to myself, oh, that'll be perfect, I'll read both this book and the other book on the Kabbalah. This is how big it is. I put this on my story when I first got it. I didn't pay attention to the page count when I ordered it, and it showed up and it was this big, and I thought it was the funniest thing, so I'm not sure that I'll be able to read both of these in the span of August. This, to be fair, is books 1 through 3, so it is sort of like a combination of 3 volumes or books put into one, which is helpful. It is rather large, and I'm excited to read it, but I just don't know if I'll be able to read both of these in 1 month. And so this one might wait. I think I'm definitely going to read this one in the month of August, and then I might pair a more fun book with it, or a book that's not as closely related to the subject matter of this one. Maybe a magical book, maybe something just different, so that way I have something to go in between. I tend to like to read a book, say I'm reading a tarot book that is a little bit more dense and packed with information. I like to have a book that feels a little bit like a relief from that, something that's a little bit more whimsical or magical and not as structured. So that's what I think I may do. So yeah, I've been playing with the Tarot of the Spirit this month, as I have the past few months. I'm really looking forward to investigating it more so through the literature in August, so I will get back to you all on that. Finally, as far as tarot decks go, we have the Thoth. This is a greenie version. This is actually a funny story. So, as I'm holding it upside down, I believe. So, I have another version of a greenie, and I had received my first greenie brand new for a really great price, and I was using it, but I was kind of worried because it was new. I didn't want to mess it up, and I was so scared for it to kind of get aged and worn and all of that. So I thought to myself, I'm always on eBay looking for vintage decks. I thought if I come across a greenie, a used greenie for a really, really good price, that I would get a backup and then maybe retire the new version or the new one that I opened, and then use maybe a pre-loved or a loved version, secondhand version of the greenie. So as it so happens, I came across one for an exceptionally good deal, went about getting it. I read the description, and the person selling it basically just said that it was in near perfect condition, pretty much, and the only real thing about it that wasn't perfect was that it had a bow to it from storage. And so in my head, and it said it was all 78 cards, complete deck. That's how it was phrased. So I purchased it, I waited, I got it. I flipped through the cards. One of the first things I realized was that it didn't have the 3 extra cards, so the 2 title cards that usually come with that version of the vintage greenies, and it didn't have the card that was black with oh my god, what is it called? I'm blanking. But it didn't have that card either. And I was like, okay, I guess to be fair, the title was misleading in saying that it was 78 card complete deck, because I'm thinking 78 cards of the tarot and then complete the 3 extra cards. They didn't mention explicitly that the 3 cards weren't in it. The box was more beat up than they made it appear to be, which is fine. I don't really care about the box. However, the cards, while bowed, and I was expecting that, I don't mind that, there are a bunch that are heavily water damaged, and it's very, very, I don't know if this will show up. They're like warped, and there's this weird sort of texturing that goes on. There's some that are, I would say there's about 10 cards, and then there's a handful also that have kind of like weird not creases, but like bends around the edges. But some are so water damaged and warped. I'll try to find an example of a pretty, like, you can kind of see it there better. In person you can see it quite a bit, and it affects the texture, and also it just like warps the card's shape. it's very strange to interact with a deck that has this. And so I did leave a negative review, and I thought to myself, maybe that I would try to set about getting a return or a refund on this deck, because it wasn't accurate, and I'm not a fan of the fact that it has, this is probably one of the, it's very, I don't know if you can tell, it's just so like warped. It's not showing up very well, but a lot of them have this like weird texture to them. It almost feels like a film, but if you pick at it, I'm guessing the card would break away. So I left a negative review because a lot of the cards are weirdly like warped, and it was listed to be in basically perfect condition aside from a slight bow, and you know it wasn't. So I left an accurate review, I should say. Not, well, it was a more critical review, and it was accurate because they were dishonest in the condition of the deck. That's just flat out how it was. But after sitting on it for a bit, and they did say that all sales were final, which I'm sure if I started a dispute, I probably would have won, because the cards are not in the condition that it was said to be in. But I decided to keep it, and I think there's something kind of endearing about it in that it is worn so well, and it kind of makes me feel more comfortable just using the deck more casually. So I'm taking this as an opportunity to feel more comfortable working with this version of the deck. And so, yeah, it's nice. Of course, I'm not going to just throw it around. I'm going to be respectful, but it's nice that I don't feel so delicate with it and like I can't touch it. So I am going to keep it. I'm going to love it and just use it to its best abilities, and hopefully give it a nice home with me. And so for some reason, I feel compelled to name this deck. So if you have any ideas for names, leave them below. I don't know what it is. There's something about it that just feels like, I don't know, like I've adopted it and I'm going to nurse it back to health, and I feel like naming it. So if you have any name ideas, leave them below. But I've really enjoyed working with this deck, and it was kind of an interesting way for me to come to terms with being okay with things not being perfect, and kind of loving the imperfections in something. And after getting over that initial frustration, which was more out of being misinformed, I am enjoying it, and it's nice to have this copy so that the other copy can kind of just sit there and I can feel kind of a peace of mind in working with the greenie. So that's nice. And then the final deck I have is the Archangel Gabriel Oracle cards by Doreen Virtue. This is my only Doreen Virtue deck. I don't actively seek them out. I'm not a fan of her. Just a disclaimer. I do like this deck, however, and I've had this deck for quite some time. I have really been getting back into, kind of getting back into working with Gabriel as for me in a more divine masculine or sacred masculine way. That's always kind of been the archetype he or the angel Gabriel presents themselves to be for me. And I was raised Roman Catholic. I was baptized. I had a communion and a confirmation, and my confirmation name is Gabriel. I picked Gabriel as my confirmation name, and so the angel Gabriel has been something like a theme in my life since I was very young, and the stories in the Bible that featured him were always my favorite, and I think that's why I picked the name for my confirmation. And so this is kind of a return. I really like the idea of reclaiming reclaiming aspects of Catholicism and Christianity for myself, now that I am kind of overcoming and healing from a childhood enmeshed in those things where I felt kind of outside. And I think that at the time, and being involved in the way that it was a little bit harmful for me, but now I feel like I can revisit it and repurpose it and reclaim the traditions and beliefs in my own way and work with them in my own way. So I have the Sheila Nagig, who for me rarely represents that divine or sacred feminine, and then I have the angel Gabriel, who really feels like a divine masculine presence in my life. So I've been using this deck to really work in that way. These cards they're really funny and corny, to be honest. To be honest, they really are. So it comes with this little guidebook, which is nice. The cards are nice. These are the backs. It's gold gilded, and they're just one of those like corny oracle decks. I'm sorry if this is the kind of deck that I don't mean to speak down upon it or disparagingly about it. I think it's really cute. It is more of that stereotypical, when you think of what an oracle deck is, this is what you would maybe think of with the... But some of the titles are just so weird. So we have agent or manager. Your work expands its reach as your partner with a professional who can help you. We have new project. Pay attention to your dreams. Express your inner truths. We have editor, which I think is really funny. Your writing or other creative projects benefit from outside help and support. Nurture yourself. Happy news. Have confidence in your creation. So oftentimes Gabriel is associated with ideas of communication and media, and it almost feels like a very Mercury Hermes parallel going on. So I would say that that's maybe where a lot of these keywords and titles come from, or the ideas of the deck. We have things like time management. The glare is really bad, sorry. Things like time management, law of attraction. But there's one that's really funny, and it has to do with like media. It's very, very interesting. Daily practice, detox time, writers group. They're just funny. I don't know. They're different. The titles and keywords to me are kind of outside of the norm that I might see in an oracle deck. And so I've enjoyed it for that. And of course, I think some of these are actually applicable to me in my projects and my writing, which I like to do. So it's very fitting, I think, for the types of activities I engage in. So that takes us through all of the decks. Now we're going to move over into the books. We have two this month, 2 books that I read and really loved. So the first is the one that I mentioned that I had read, which is by Robert M. Place, The Tarot, Magic, Alchemy, Hermeticism, and Neoplatonism. I think many people have seen this book. It's a larger book. I was intimidated at first, thinking this was going to be a dense read or a long read. It's more of a quick read. There's a lot of pictures in this book. So I would say I would venture to say a third or a fourth of the pages, maybe more like a fourth or a fifth, are pictures. For example, when you get into the parts that are about the deck, it's like picture, description page. Picture, description page. So like you go through this book very quickly. It's not at all dense or hard to read. The font size and the spacing, it's very spaced out. It's not small text. There are, again, a lot of pictures on most pages, so you go through it very quickly. And I'm thinking I know I'm going to do a full review on this book, just because I know it's one a lot of people are familiar with, but I think it's helpful to be able to know the contents of it to some extent, so that way you can make an informed purchase, and it's very interesting. So to me, this book, it wasn't deceiving, but I was expecting the entirety of it to be a guidebook for the Alchemical Tarot. Less than half of it was really in direct reference to the cards themselves, so that's one thing I will say. And then of course there is the tie to the Tarot of the Sevenfold Mystery, which I think goes it's more unnoticed. Like, it's not directly, you don't hear people talking about the two of them together as much, and you'll hear a lot of people referencing it in terms of the Alchemical Tarot, when in actuality this deck is also referenced almost just as much as the alchemical aspects of the Alchemical Tarot. So I think that I would like, and I do plan to make a review on this, so if this is a book that you've debated getting and you'd like more information, let me know, but I'm pretty sure I'm already going to be filming a review on this. If you'd like a review on either of these decks, let me know as well. I don't think I could do it all in one video because the book is quite large and there's a lot in terms of the contents, and then each of these decks are kind of their own animal, although there are similarities. So let me know if you'd want a review or a walkthrough or thoughts on either of these decks, and I am planning on doing a review on this book, so stay tuned for that so you can have more information there. The other book, and of course I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of great insights. It definitely helped me to understand both of those decks a lot more clearly. Of course, the symbols are explained, the ones that you might not really know about otherwise, and then Robert M. Place adds really nice touches to ways of reading the specific cards and the decks themselves that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't read this book. So Very helpful. Definitely recommend if you have either of those decks, but I will say it's not all about just those decks. There is a lot of other things going on in here, which I will talk about in the review. So next, the second book that I read this month is one that I think many people are familiar with. It's kind of a classic, or a spiritual classic in a way. It's by John O'Donohue. I'm gonna not pronounce this correctly. Anam, a book of Celtic wisdom. I'm sure that this looks familiar to a lot of people. It's a bestseller. It's in Barnes and Nobles and all over the place, and I've seen it in a lot of places before getting it. And so I read it, I really enjoyed it. This is one of those I find that a lot of books on Celtic spirituality take this approach of a very meditative style where it's somewhat poetic and fluid, and there's not as much form and shape to the actual writing as much as it is about very vague, broad concepts and getting to the heart of existence and reality and living life. Now, there is a sort of structuring to this in that the beginning starts with the beginnings of life, and the end is really dealing with death, coming to terms with death, what death is. The entirety of it is really about interacting with and living conscientiously aware, bringing an awareness to life and living life to the fullest extent through more of a spiritual lens, changing one's perspective, appreciation of life and existence and being, and also the idea of the Anam, which I know I'm probably mispronouncing very severely, has to do with a soul friend, or a soul friend is really what it gets at. And so that's kind of a theme throughout the book, the idea of a soul friendship. So that's a Celtic or a Gaelic saying or a phrase that kind of translates more so to the idea of friends that cannot be separated, where there's this kind of heightened connection between two people. And so the book uses this phrase and this concept as a means to illustrate a bunch of other concepts. So the idea of the Anam is returned to throughout various sections, but you do get these large chapters with subsections, and there are sort of prayers and incantations and poems that are cited. There are very big concepts of meaning and fulfillment and existence that are covered within this book. I will say that towards the end, the way that death was spoken about, while very interesting and I can imagine super helpful for some people, and I like the idea that it was really about the idea of death being beautiful and not something to be shied away from, and there being fear because society really just brushes over it and has us ignore it. So I enjoyed that it really broached those subjects, although there were some aspects about the way that death was approached that didn't resonate with me. That's a personal opinion. Most of the book was really, I connected deeply with it, so I enjoyed this, and I plan to read more of John O'Donohue's books. He has many, many books. I think the next one I'm going to get and read is, I believe the title is something like The Four Elements. So really enjoyed this. Do recommend it. I'd be curious to know if you have read it, what you thought of it. Definitely a great one to read. I enjoyed it. So next, we are into the miscellaneous stuff. There's not too much here to speak on, but I will start with... Oh, I put stuff on this table and then forgot what I even put here as far as my favorites, so nice surprise for me. This crystal skull. This is my first crystal skull, actually, so I have a big skull on my working altar, but it's made of alabaster, and that, of course, is not a crystal. So this one, I believe, is milky quartz with iron inclusions, which give it that yellow hue and sort of striations of those darker spots. And this one just really called out to me in a store. I saw a bunch of crystal skulls, and I liked the shape and coloring of this one. I know I've watched videos where people speak on there being something to the psychology of what face in a crystal skull or what type of crystal skull you're attracted to. So if anybody knows more about that, please feel free to enlighten me. I just really liked this one and the coloring and the face and the shape, and I've been enjoying it, and I don't really know how to work with a crystal skull. I work with crystals, but I guess maybe there's something different to the idea of the shape and the skull. So feel free to enlighten me. That's something I'm looking to research more, but I've really been enjoying it as an altar piece and getting acquainted with it. So that's that. Next, I have another sort of altar, well, more of a figure and a statue. This is one of Gabriel. I just got this rather small one. I wanted to get a bigger one, but they're expensive, and this one wasn't very expensive, and just because I am mostly starting very serious work with Gabriel, it's been something throughout my life, but now it's a lot more intentional and methodical, and so I wanted to start with some sort of figure or statue of him, and so this one felt right. I liked the color. I liked the fact that he's holding a scroll and a quill, that communicative aspect, that very, like I spoke of before, that parallel almost to Mercury and Hermes in a way as a communicator. So very interesting. I am enjoying this. I'm kind of redoing my altars, so that might be something I will show. Well, this altar is staying the same. This one is for the Sheila Na gig, and it is more of a divine feminine earthy altar. It's going to stay the same, but my working altar I'm thinking of redoing and dedicating, changing up just the whole entire thing, and then making sure that a section at least is allocated to Gabriel. I've been getting really into angelic magic, studying and looking at Enochian or Enochian texts, and getting into all of that. So I found all of that to be really interesting. So this has been a favorite for me, along with what it signifies, which is working with Gabriel and a broadening in my studies in terms of magic and spirituality. Finally, the last thing I want to mention, and this is kind of anticlimactic because I'm not going to show the actual thing itself. This piece of paper, it has sigils on it. A lot of sigil magic this month. I do sigil magic all the time. It's probably my most frequent form, technique, practice in terms of magic, making sigils. I really enjoy crafting them through various means, whether that be taking a word and making it into something very consciously, or entering a state of meditation, or that, is it theta state? It might be, where you really allow something to just come out based on a concept or word, and that's how it's created. So many ways to do and work sigil magic. I've been enjoying it a lot this month. I'll say that the favorite with this is because I have been doing sigil magic that I have take place over the night time, where I will have a little spell, have the sigil, do a sort of focused thing right before I sleep, put the sigil in a piece of paper underneath my pillow, and then allow it to work in that way. And I have found that it affects my sleep in some, depending on what the sigil is and how it works, but it's been interesting. Sometimes I feel like I have more of this like dead sleep where I'm like out like a light, as opposed to lightly sleeping and dreaming and all of that. When I do sigil magic under my pillow, it does change my sleep pattern in a very strange way, but I found it to actually be really effective. So it's something I think I'm going to continue doing, and just something I thought I'd share. It's been a favorite for me, and I've really been jiving with it. So that takes us to the end of the favorites for this month. Let me know what you thought, and I hope you are all well. Like and subscribe if this was fun, and until next time, bye everyone.